We have some huge news. The House has released a more than 1,800-page, $3 trillion stimulus bill. Now this one's a little bit different than all these other proposals that we've been seeing because this is actually on a bill that's going to get voted on it. Well, actually it's a lot of proposals all jammed up together into one bill, and I think some of you are going to be really happy to see what is contained on this. So the HEROES Act is what we're calling this, which stands for the Health and Economic Recovery Omnibus Emergency Solutions Act. They sure love their acronyms. I had no idea what omnibus meant, so I went ahead and looked it up so you guys don't have to. Omnibus has two definitions. The first definition is a volume containing several novels or other items previously published separately. In this case, it's a bunch of proposals all put together in one bill. The second definition is literally just a bus, like a school bus. Anyways, onto the bill. There's a ton of things in here, so I'm going to point out just some of the highlights and focus most of the time on the things that you guys are interested in, like additional direct payment stimulus checks, small business funding, and some local and state government funding. This is really exciting. So this bill carries an additional direct stimulus check payment, and it is pretty similar to what we expected. The proposal is another one-time stimulus payment of $1,200. It's actually pretty darn similar to the first stimulus payment. However, this one is just slightly different in the dependent department. In the first round, we saw $500 payments per dependent, per child dependent, and in this one, we're looking at $1,200 payments per child dependent up to 3 total dependents. So this means for a family of 5 with 2 adults and 3 children, they would be looking at a one-time payment of $6,000 under this stimulus bill. So the income requirements for this direct stimulus are very similar, or actually they're the exact same as the first stimulus, where to receive full payment for single filers, it is under $75,000 a year adjusted gross income. Joint filers, $150,000 a year, and head of households, $112,500 per year. Now above those amounts, the stimulus payment scales down pretty quickly. I'm not going to go over all the numbers here because it's the exact same as before. A key difference here is this stimulus had verbiage added that disallows creditors from taking any portion of the stimulus bill to pay for debts, which is a great move in the right direction, I think. We saw this happen in the first round where some banks were receiving stimulus check payments into their accounts for their account holders and then taking out things like overdraft fees or other, things that were owed to the bank. And luckily, many banks decided to not do this, but I've heard that there were a few that did. However, this isn't going to be an issue in the next bill. If this passes, they're disallowed from doing that. So that's a great update to see that there's something written in law that disallows them from doing that, because the whole point is to stimulate the economy, not to pay for overdraft fees. It's to go out and buy groceries, to go out and get your car fixed or whatever exactly you need done that you can't afford right now. So you'll also be happy to hear, this is really great news. Steny Hoyer, the U.S. representative, said additional stimulus checks along with state and local money would be Democrats' red lines, meaning they won't consider cutting this from the next package, even if Republicans push for changes. So this means that the direct stimulus payments and state and local government funding are things they absolutely want in another package, which means in turn that there's a really good chance that there's going to be some amount of funding for those in the next stimulus payment. And I'll get into what I see, my predictions are, what will actually end up happening, but I think this is a great sign that there will be some form of additional payment in both of those departments, additional checks. So this is really, really interesting considering that just last week, Democrats were saying that they may just be straying away a little bit from the direct payments and putting more focus on the state and local government funding. However, we see they're now back at it with a vengeance. Direct payments, this could be a tactic to get more votes. Who knows? It doesn't really matter because people need these payments. So I'm happy to see that this is part of the proposal. Similarly, it's been stated several times that Republicans will not support an additional bill that does not include increased liability protection for employers as businesses begin to reopen and fear litigation. There's a big fear that as businesses reopen, they're going to have, businesses are just afraid to reopen, that they have customers who get sick or employees who get sick, and this sue-happy country that we live in is a huge fear for business owners, and you need businesses open in order to have the economy to roll and to be able to start producing again and get back to normal reality. All those small businesses really matter. So I'm a strong proponent of adding some kind of liability protection or some way to get employers some more protection. I'm not saying to put employees in harm's way. I'm just saying if there's a fear to reopen businesses, there needs to be something done so they can be reopened and start making money and make this economy start turning again. So what will this mean? I can only predict as to what exactly is going to happen. I believe Republicans will take a look at this and compromise on some form of direct stimulus payment, and I think it'd be pretty safe to assume that it's going to be almost identical to the first round, with a $1,200 per person stimulus and then a $500 per dependent. I think it's just kind of human nature to go back to what we've done before because it worked the first time, so go right back. And it was probably a smart tactic for the Democratic representatives who proposed this bill to go slightly higher, but not like a crazy amount higher on the dependent thing, in order to land somewhere right around where the first stimulus payment was. And to be honest, I think most people would be happy with the $1,200 payment. From what I've heard, most people say the best stimulus package is the one that's in their bank account. So if it's $1,200, great. I think a lot of people will be happy with that. So this bill also contains a huge portion of funds for state and local governments. The bill contains $500 billion for states, $375 billion for local governments, $20 billion for tribal communities, and another $20 billion for territories like Puerto Rico, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. This over $900 billion in funding is massive when we compare it to the amount in the CARES Act for state and local governments, which offered $150 billion in funding. So we're looking at, what is that? More than 6 times the amount of funding for state and local governments. That's huge. So I personally forecast that that's going to be one of the things that's negotiated down once this bill actually goes through. I would have guessed it's probably going to be negotiated down like 40% to somewhere like $550 to $600 billion for the state and local government funding. This bill also outlines an extension of the $600 additional unemployment insurance benefits. Currently, the increased unemployment benefits are set to discontinue at the end of July. The new plan outlines continued payments through January 31st, 2021, and put in a so-called soft cutoff to ensure some individuals would get benefits through March 2021. So that would be another very expensive program, but I mean, depending on how long all this chaos lasts, it might be needed. So the bill includes some small business, paycheck protection, EIDL funding, but it's kind of piddly. It's just a tiny amount compared to the total amount of funding that has been received so far. They propose an additional $10 billion in funding, which increases the small business funding from $660 billion-ish to $670 billion. So that's a 1.5% increase in funding there. The plan goes on to support an increase in funding for SNAP food assistance program with $10 million in additional funding for that program, which I think that's probably very important as well. And with elections coming in 6 months, the HEROES Act includes $3.6 billion in vote-by-mail programs. This money would help states with the cost of expanding vote-by-mail or no-excuse absentee voting, or increase funding for personal protective equipment for poll workers in states that keep the in-person voting polls open. That's obviously very important that people are able to vote, depending on how long all this lasts. Finally, the bill contains $25 billion in funding for the U.S. Postal Service. Now, this one has had a little bit of back and forth on it. This agency is one of the only government agencies that actually is self-funded. It makes its own money and doesn't rely on taxpayer money like most other government agencies do, in order to keep its doors open. However, in recent times, it's faced some financial difficulties, and the Rona has only made things even worse. And Trump has been a big proponent of not giving them funding until they try to raise their prices. So I'll be interested to see what exactly goes through there, because there's been a lot of argument on both sides. And so yeah, this was just some of the highlights from the HEROES bill. I mean, there's many other things that will receive funding in this program, including basically every government agency receives something, including an additional $5 million that goes to the House of Representatives, $30 million for salaries and expenses at the Government Accountability Office, and $200 million in salaries and expenses for the federal prison system. So if you're curious to see what all this money was allotted to, like that's just 3 of like 100 different agencies that receive money, I encourage you to go and check out the actual bill. I'll have it linked in the description so you can have a better idea of where all this money is going, and you might find things that are like, why is that receiving funding? So that's all I have on the HEROES Act for now. We'll have more firm guidance on Friday, what exactly is going to happen once this vote goes through on this bill. If you appreciate me breaking down this 800-page bill, I would appreciate if you stimulated that subscribe button. And that's all I have for today. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a profitable day. Goodbye.